Live stream and recording are now on. Just, if you can unmute.
Yeah, over to me now.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Well, Morena, beautiful morning on the Kapiti coast. It's nice to be doing Zoom from home and be able to look out and see the sunshine while we're in this hui. I welcome you all to the Strategy and Operations Committee for Thursday, the 10th of March, to elected members and staff and those who may be viewing online. Apologise in advance if I keep looking to my right. I'm just operating two screens, one for the Zoom hui and obviously one for my agenda papers and notes. So I'll do my best to keep looking at you all as I just try and juggle both. Staff of DEM Services have already just made elected members aware of the Zoom protocols. If you've got any questions, just ask them directly of DEM Services. I think via the chat, if that's correct, Tanika. But just reminding,
that's correct.
Yeah, just reminding elected members that's the only use for the chat, not to discuss or debate the topics during the meeting, because it's not captured for the members of the public if they want to view later. And so we are now going to move to the item number 2, which is the council blessing. And Councillor Randall is going to read the blessing out this morning. So over to you, Bernie. Morning, Bernie.
Yeah, morning. Okay, as we deliberate on the issues before us, we trust that we will reflect positively on the communities we serve. Let us all seek to be effective and just, so that with courage, vision, and energy, we provide positive leadership in a spirit of harmony and compassion.
Thank you, Bernie. We'll now move on to, I just want to check, Councillor Holbrook, have you got nothing? You've got nothing? All right, now move on to item number 3, which is apologies. Have not been made aware of any, and neither have DEM Services. Sorry, Councillor Elliott has some apologies just for lateness. Be joining us a little bit later in the meeting. And so Tanika, if that needs to be noted, I'll leave that over to you. So we'll then move to item number 4, declarations of interest relating to items on the agenda. Any elected members want to signal any declarations of interest, please do so. I'll give a few seconds for DEM Services to pick up on any.
None have been declared.
Thank you, Tanika. So with that, we will move to item number 5, public speaking time. There is none that I've been made aware of. I think that still is the case. So we'll move to item number 6, which is members' business. 6A, there is no responses. 6B, any leave of absence. Again, I'll just rely on you, Tanika, because I can't see all the participants.
So none have been declared.
Thank you. And item 6C, matters of an urgent nature, there have been none made aware to me. So we move to the next item, updates, which, as you can see in the agenda, there is none. And so quickly we move to item number 8, which is the reports. Just before we delve into this, team, councillors, you'll be aware that we've got a fairly hefty work program on today, extending right through into the evening or early evening. So I'm partially in your hands in terms of how we move through these papers. As usual, I'll welcome free and frank discussion and questions, but just want to remind you we do have quite a bit on today. So I'm going to move to item number 8.1, which is the adoption of the policy work program, and just welcome staff to introduce that report. We're reminding elected members that we've had some quite comprehensive briefings on this and given a clear steer to the staff. And this is simply the adoption of the program following those briefings and workshops. So over to Leslie, I think.
Kia ora koutou, Mr. Chair and councillors. I am presenting the 2021 to 2024 policy work program for adoption today, which I'll refer to as the PWP. Just a quick summary. As Councillor Coots said, we did obviously go through this at a briefing a little while ago, but just as a reminder, the PWP is refreshed every 3 years following the LTP. It sets our policy work priorities for the next 3-year period, and it's a tool to support Council's policy framework. It also helps us inform reporting. The new PWP has a more refined focus than the last one, so that it is focusing on key policies, strategies and bylaws only. It now excludes those items that are operational projects or reported on separately. Since the PWP was presented at a council briefing a few weeks ago, feedback has been taken on board with some minor changes made to the visual presentation, and that includes highlighting those with a legislative requirement. The progress of the PWP projects will be reported on 6 monthly to council. So I will take the report as read, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Leslie. And just before we open it up for questions, following the last briefing that we had with staff, as Leslie has said, changes have been made based on the feedback from elected members. I met with staff via Zoom hui with Leslie and Hamish, and we discussed the feedback and looked at ways that the information can be presented a bit clearer. Have to give credit to the team. Leslie had already made a number of those changes, if not all of them, by the time we met on the hui, and you'll see that feedback incorporated in the final document. As Chair also raised the idea of having a bit more of that information on the council website, because obviously in the document that's attached, there's only so much we can put on that before it comes too busy, and the staff gave me the assurance that they'll go away and have a look at the suggestion around providing a bit more content on the council website. That's obviously pending the time and resources involved in doing so and the practicalities around that. So finally, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that, yeah, certainly there was a lot of feedback taken on since the last briefing, and what you see now is the final version of that to be adopted. So I'm going to open up for questions, and if you just want to raise your hand, we'll just move through. If there is none, then just look for someone to move the recommendations. Councillor Halliday, you're the first one that I've seen there.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, just a couple of quick questions. The positive ageing strategy has a target date of April 2022. I was just wondering if that's a little bit ambitious, just after a meeting I had recently, whether that needs to be corrected, or is that an appropriate time to raise that now?
I guess what I would say is a lot of the stuff we should have raised through the briefing. That being said, there's no problem you raising it now, so I'm just going to hand it over to either Leslie or the appropriate staff member to respond to that question from Councillor Halliday.
Morena koutou, I can respond to that. Yes, Councillor Halliday, you are correct that given the current set of circumstances, that is now an ambitious timeframe. And at the time that the report was prepared, we were still working through the implications of the recent resourcing changes within the team responsible for this work. And I can tell you now, several weeks after that, we have had to keep this piece of work on hold while the remaining team members progress some other more urgent pieces of work. We're in the process of engaging some extra resource to help with this project. That will take a few weeks to get in place, and at that point we will revisit the project plan for getting it completed and be able to give you some advice on new timeframes.
Lovely. And look, thank you very much, Janice, with regards to the update I received the other day as well. It was much appreciated. And just another question, it's in relation to number 24 on page 9, and it was just around individual projects created by mana whenua. I'm just curious to know whether there will be a list or if this is tracked anywhere at all.
I'm just sending that one back to staff to respond to.
Sorry, could you please repeat the question, Councillor Halliday?
Certainly. Look, number 24 reads, as the implementation of the PWP is going to carried over for the next 3 years, planning to ensure that individual projects are created in partnership with Mana Whenua will be undertaken by individual project managers. I was just curious to know whether we're going to have a list of those anywhere as such, so that we've got an idea what's going on in that space as well.
So the primary list of the pieces of work is in this program, and there will be there are different managers across the council who will be progressing individual pieces of work, and it's their responsibility to undertake that engagement with Mana Whenua as part of those projects.
Cool. So we won't be sort of informed of just what those projects might potentially be as such. That's sort of lower down the governance preview, should we say.
I think what we've heard Natasha respond to, Martin, was that it is the list that we've got attached as appendix, as the appendix, the policy work program. So it's nothing outside of that list that you see in there, and it'll just be the specific ones that relate, I guess maybe, for example, the stormwater, the wastewater.
I appreciate that. Mr. Chair, I was just curious whether that list is actually going to be somewhere else, or if there is a list of that at all. But it doesn't sound like there is. So would that be right, Natasha? That's just an individual. That's just letting us know that the individual managers are dealing with Mana Whenua on individual projects as such.
In terms of oversight of the policy work program as a whole, this is the primary tool for doing that, and we will be reporting back to council periodically on that. So you will get an opportunity to seek input on, to update us on where things are at.
Lovely, thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Look, you raised an interesting point just before I move to Councillor McCann, and that was around, so since we've done this work, we've obviously had some further developments in a particular team that impact on the work program. It comes back to a point that Councillor Preparedness has raised a number of times around the timelines that sit on here and potential delays. So, we have taken that on board, and you'll see the key there with the indicated previous target completion date. And if we do manage to populate the website a bit further, there'll be a little bit more explanation around, this project has been delayed due to staffing, resources or so forth. So I just want to make that point that feedback has been picked up along the way. Councillor McCann, over to you next.
Thank you very much. Just for clarity, I just want to make sure that we understand where the various bits of policy strategy fit that are part of the housing strategy.
So some of those will be delivered through the district plan work program, which is reported on separately to council. Where it's most of those will be separate projects and therefore won't be showing up on this, which is targeted at being a policy and strategy work program. The other element in terms of some of those actions that will fall out of the housing strategy will relate to things like development contributions policy, which would be developed through the long-term plan. So the other decisions that were made earlier were for this policy work program to be narrowed down and not be duplicating other pieces of work such as the long-term plan and program and district plan work program. So some of those won't be visible in here, but they are still happening and be reported separately to council.
Thank you. We'll take the discussion about whether some of that's on that long-term plan or annual plan later. Thanks very much, Natasha.
Councillor Holborough and then Councillor Preparedness.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just specifically around the culture and heritage strategy, I did raise some questions about particularly the word arts not being included in the name of that strategy, but I believe that probably this report hasn't responded to that yet. So I'll take that offline. I'm also interested in the intersection between that strategy and the wellbeing strategy in terms of cultural wellbeing and the wider implications of wellbeing on the arts in our community, but I'm happy to take those offline because it's still a work in progress.
All right, thank you, Janet. Councillor Preparedness, good morning.
Orina, Councillor Coates. I raised my hand's been raised for a little while, and I just actually wanted to follow up on the comment, Mr. Chair, that you made in relation to this older person's policy that may well be pushed out. And as it stands in this report, which will be the one that goes on the council website, I'm just wondering whether or not there needs to be a comment attached to that that project, just to indicate that we already know that this date will potentially be moved out.
Thank you, Jocelyn. I had the question, the similar sort of question in my head in response to Councillor Halliday. I understand the response from Ms McDougall, but the question that I had, which I was going to ask at the end, was if these resolutions are passed today, does that date stay the same in the in this document? To me, it would make more sense that it was amended today and actually reflected the state of play as of today. So maybe now if we could address that, Janice, if you want to respond to that. And did you have any further questions, Jocelyn, before we?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I think that this report, you know, needs to reflect what we tabled with you today, but the minutes of the meeting will could reflect the commentary that was offered by staff around the timing. And on our website, the agenda and the minutes sit alongside each other. So it wouldn't be, I think, appropriate to amend the report that has already been in the agenda. We just need to make sure that the minutes reflect the conversation.
Thank you. And although I don't disagree, Janice, can I just clarify? I guess what I'm thinking, and possibly where Councillor Preparedness is thinking, is if we adopt this today and then this A3 or whatever it is attachment becomes a PDF on the council website, that I get we can't retrospectively amend a document that we are considering today in this meeting, but certainly when we put it online and put it out there. So is that appropriate?
I think any comms or content that is created for the website could certainly reflect where we were at a point in time, but with that strategy. But at the moment, I couldn't. We are still a few weeks away from being able to give you an updated date of when, target date for delivery of this piece of work. So I wouldn't know what that content would be right at this minute.
Yeah. So accept that. Can I just clarify, and then we'll move on from here? At this stage, you're suggesting that the attachment, if we're to see this in a month's time on the website or elsewhere, that it would on the LG Hub, that date will remain the same in terms of the older persons.
I think this is possibly a conversation we could take offline in terms of giving you some reassurance that we'll make sure that whatever information is publicly available on our website or any of our other channels about this piece of work reflects the fact that April is not going to be the delivery date for this piece of work.
All right. Thank you, Janice. Look, I'm happy to do that. I just didn't want to brush the question aside as trivial. So, Councillor Preparedness, did you have any further questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I still believe that there should be an asterisk in this report, because I hear what Janice is saying in terms of having the information provided elsewhere, but often people don't go and look at multiple documents, and often they'll just go to this one here, and if they see it a certain date here, that's what they expect it's being worked to, whereas in reality we know that it's not.
So I accept what you're saying there. I'd like to move the discussion on from here and take Ms McDougall's advice around resolving this offline. If you can just trust in me as chair to ensure that that's captured and that I work with staff on that, well, I'm happy to do that. So I certainly accept the point you're making there. Did you have a further question?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Councillor Randall?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to support Councillor Preparedness about the positive ageing strategy. Now, Janice may confirm that I raised this. I mean, this has been deferred about two other times. So I'm worried.
Councillor Randall, I know you haven't asked a question yet, so I don't want to cut you short of your time, but I do want to remind you if you have a question. I just want to make sure that elected members aren't getting
the question. I'm concerned, Mr. Chair, that the date for completion of April 2022, which would have been a suitable time for a memorial for Trevor Daniels for the work he put into it, is likely to be deferred again. And can Janice give us a firm deadline on this report?
I think if I understood her earlier, she couldn't, but I will allow her just to respond again in case she has anything further to add there, because I see you might become unmuted.
You're correct. I can't give you a firm date at the moment. As I've outlined, we are engaging additional resource to support this piece of work so that we can get progress back on track, but we're not sufficiently progressed with that to be able to give you a time frame. I think the point that that it's important that I acknowledge here is that Councillor Randall is correct. This specific piece of work has had several interruptions to its progress over the last couple of years. That's a reflection of several different factors. The first being that it's delivered by a team whose work program and operations have been quite significantly affected by COVID and the amount of, I guess, interruption that comes from their other work supporting social and community organisations to support the community through COVID, and also the fact that we've lost 3 members of staff from that team since December has had a significant impact on our ability to progress a range of pieces of work within that team. And it is unfortunate, given that I assured Councillor Randall that April was a very achievable deadline the last time we spoke about this. But unfortunately, we have had to prioritise staff effort on pieces of work that are about actually getting money out to community and social organisations at a time when that is really needed. So we've prioritised work on the social investment program ahead of the age-friendly strategy, because we know there are organisations that are very much in need of that funding.
Janice, thank you very much for the detailed response, because I think it does give context in terms of the why. To Councillor Randall and Councillor Halliday and any others, I think what I want to do from here is just ask staff, and there's no need to respond unless you really want to, Janice, but to just commit to once there is a clearer timeline and more of a fulsome update, just to go back to the relevant portfolio holders or councillors that have inquired about this outside of this meeting, and just give you an update in terms of the state of play and the revised date, which will obviously come back to a further council meeting for formal amendment. So are we okay with that? And you'll just be updated as the relevant portfolio holders. Councillor Randall, did you have any further questions? I see your hand still up.
No, I just want to thank Janice for a very good reply, very honest reply. Yeah.
Thank you, Bernie. Councillor Halliday, I see you've got your hand up again.
Through you, Mr. Chair, as portfolio holder, can I just make a comment on that?
Yeah, look, but can I just check whether you're happy with that approach that I've suggested in terms of staff just offline coming back to you when they have the information that you're seeking?
Very much so, Mr. Chair. I was just going to comment that actually Janice kept me abreast of what's going on here. I was updated recently. I know a working group's been formed in this space last year. COVID's certainly got in the way around this, but as portfolio, I have been aware of that situation as well.
Thank you. So to summarise, I think we've got the point in terms of the date of that one, and staff will come back to the relevant portfolio holders when they have, relevant information to update you with. Any further questions on this particular paper? I can't see any further hands. So if not, do we have someone that wants to move the recommendations on page 6, recommendations A and B? Councillor Halliday, are you happy to move? Thank you. And Councillor Buswell, second. Or is that a, yep, nod there. Councillor Halliday's moved and seconded. You've got a right of introduction, and then we'll open it up for debate. Waved? Okay, so open it up for debate. If there's no hands, we'll move straight to putting it to the vote. We'll just wait and see. We've got a hand from Councillor Hanford. Morena, Sophie. First cab off the rank.
Morena, just a really, really brief comment from me. I just wanted to thank staff and specifically Leslie for really kind of taking hold of some of those comments I had to make about the kind of display and the look of the PWP, and to see some of those things reflected, and a really fulsome email back from Leslie as to kind of how those things could be reflected and why some of them maybe couldn't at this stage was really, really awesome. So I just wanted to commend staff for their work on this, and really appreciate the opportunity to feed in things through the chair and also to have those things reflected. So yeah, thanks Leslie and thanks team.
Thanks for that, Sophie. Anyone else? I can't see any other hands up. No. And so we're just going to put that one to the vote. Remember, a green tick for yes and a X for against. And if you can, so all those in favour?
Mr. Chair, we have 10 in favour.
Excellent. So that is passed.
If
I just wanna
everybody could
thank-
just drop away their votes now,
Votes.
so that, thank you.
Yeah. So look, Leslie, thank you to you and your team in terms of the work that's done. I think just echoing those comments from Councillor Hanford, certainly a thorough piece of work there, and really appreciate working with you on that and speaking to that today. So team, if we can now move on to the next item, number 8.2, which is the major event fund policy update found on page 13. And I think we have Monica to speak to this this morning. You'll recall again that we've been through a briefing on this, and essentially this paper is bringing forward the recommendations based out of that discussion with councillors, noting that there is another discussion councillors want to have at a later date in terms of the supporting more sort of social events that have more of a social focus. But today we're talking about the major events fund. So who have we got, Tanika, to walk us through this report?
Mr. Chair, we had Monica in, but I believe that she is also on another call. So I take some direction from Natasha.
Well, before we move to Natasha, can I just check with elected members? Pop your hand up now if you are going to have questions on this. I don't want to be casual about the report, but Monica is trying to juggle two roles at the moment. So we've got a couple of questions by the looks of it. So we will just go to Natasha and see if there is what Natasha wants to do in terms of the report itself, whether we move on to the next one and come back to this one.
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I may take you up on that suggestion, the staff involved in this do have a Tourism Advisory Board meeting they are supporting at the moment, and they'll be available around about 10:30. So apologies very much for the double up there, but would appreciate being able to sort this around.
Okay, all right. So we'll move on to item number 8.3 then. That will take us a wee bit of a while to get through the council performance, and we'll come back to the major events fund at the duration of 8.3. So hopefully everyone's got that clear. We're now moving on to 8.3 on page 28 of the report. And I think we've got Joe to walk us through that report, and then obviously we'll open it up for questions. Before we have Joe come on board, I just want to note that you councillors have been around the table for a while. Will note that the council performance report is a new revised version. It is a trimmed down version of what was previously a very large document that took us a good length of time to get through, often too long, and essentially captures the highlights, still has all of that key bits of information in there. I know Mark and the team have been working hard on trying to get the balance right. He has said to me that they welcome any feedback on the new presentation and layout. I'm assuming he'll probably want that offline, but I'm going to hand it over to Mark now just to talk that through, to sort of acknowledge that there is a bit of a step change to this. And Mark, if I could just ask for you and the staff, the key thing for me is that you're just noting whatever areas that you're talking to, you're noting the pages so that elected members can keep up. So over to you. Good to see you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Councillor Coates, for the introduction of the report. Just to echo what Councillor Coates has just said, it is really a rationalisation of 3 reports. We've certainly taken feedback from yourselves over many years, and this is a giant leap and a step forward to make sure that the most relevant information is easy to see. And for yourselves and the readers of the report, they can clearly see how council is performing, both financially and non-financially. So in terms of the order of play for today, my task today was to give you a very brief introduction. I was then handing over the baton to Joe. Joe will just do a very quick overview of the non-financial performance. Ian will then join us. He will provide you with a very quick overview of the financial performance of the council. We then have Josh from Research First, who will just take you very quickly through the resident satisfaction survey results for the half year. and then we'll hand back to the chair and we'll take questions. And how we do that, whether or not we just go through the report section by section, we can probably decide that as we get there. But it will be helpful if you just probably let Joe, Ian and Josh do their presentations, and then we'll pick up questions afterwards. Just another point that I just wanted to stress or just remind everyone that typically this will be a quarterly report. This particular one today covers 2 quarters, the half-year results, and that was due to the fact that we were redesigning 3 reports into one, which did take a lot of time, as well as the fact that we have just been pretty stressed in terms of resourcing with COVID and all the other things that we've had to respond to. So I really do hope that you enjoy this report, this new format. And as Councillor Coates said, this is the first giant leap in a long journey. So if you do have any feedback or any change requests, I'd certainly like to know what that is. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to hand over to Joe. Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair. Actually, there is a correction that needs to be made to the report. So I'm actually going to hand over to Janice to just talk through the correction. It is an update to the report since the report was issued.
Thank you, Mark. And I note that Councillor Buswell has her hand up. So Janice, if you don't mind, I just want to check what that is. I'm not sure whether she needs to join something else or...
I don't need to join anything else. I'm just... I'm working off the agenda that's published on the council website. So when you're referring to the page numbers, would you be able to refer to the page numbers that are on the report as it's published? That would be awesome, instead of the page number on the agenda that the councillors are otherwise looking at, just because I've got 2 screens going.
I think through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor, I think what we'll do is we'll refer to both. We'll say the council agenda is this page, but in terms of the report, it's that page. So you can follow us, and everyone else who's got the agenda knows where we are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Ange. So over to Ms. McDougall.
Thank you. With my apologies, councillors, we need to flag an error within the governance performance measures section of this report. So that is page 40 of the report itself, or page 71 of the agenda. And I believe that many of you have received some communication from a community member in relation to this error. Within the report, we have identified or reported that there was one official information Lagoina request where we did not comply with the required legislative timeframes for responding to that query. In fact, we should have been reporting that there were 3 queries within this quarter where we did not comply with the legislative timeframes. So my apologies that we have had an error in that reporting, and we will make sure that this is amended and covered off in future reports. The reason for the error is that there is a manual process around capturing this reporting, and it was a case of human error. We missed several items that should have been included in the report, and you have my apologies for that.
Thank you, Janice. I see that Councillor Reynolds got his hand up. Bernie, I'm not stifling your opportunity to raise this. I do want to just, as we move through the report, if you can just hold it till we get there, so we can just move through the flow of the meeting and don't dominate the start of the meeting just with this discussion. So we'll come back to you. You will have the opportunity to ask whatever questions you wanted to there. I appreciate Ms. McDougall raising the error. To be clear, it was raised with me as Chair of Strategy and Ops, via resident of the community, and obviously the other councillors were aware of it. I handed it over to staff to answer, not being aware of it myself, and obviously the answer that Ms. McDougall has given is in response to that email query that's been raised. So just in the interest of transparency, noting it has been raised, it has been responded to, it is an error and it will be amended. So with that, and I will remember that you're there, Bernie, when we get to the appropriate part in the agenda, we'll now move to the actual fullness of the report. And I think back to you, Mark, or is it to Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will hand over to Joe. And just so that everyone's on the same page, if we go to just for example, page 31 of the agenda, that is actually page 1 of the performance report. So staff will make best efforts to call out the agenda page number as well as the page number on the actual report itself.
Thank you, Mark. And as chair, I just need a signal from you when staff have gotten through their bits that you want to hand it back to me, and then we'll move. I think we'll just move through activity by activity so that I know when staff have finished, and then when we can move on to opening it up section by section. So over to you, Jo.
Thank you, Mark, and through you, Mr. Chair. Good morning and morning, councillors. Obviously, as Mark has said, this is a report that contains Q1 and Q2 results year to date against our long-term plan. This is the first time we get a good sense of how we're going against the long-term plan in terms of our performance measures, projects and initiatives, our finances, and the residents' satisfaction feedback. You will see that in the snapshot in the agenda, pages 38 and 39. I'm sorry, I don't have the other page numbers in front of me at the moment. That snapshot provides a really high-level summary of the entire document. So if you want a really quick summary, that's the place to go. It's also the first time we see how residents think we're progressing against our outcomes. And the really good news is that we're doing pretty well against most of our outcomes, although we do have some challenges, as we know, around housing, and we have work programs in place to look at progressing that further. In terms of our performance measures, at the half-year mark, we have 44% meeting target. Not quite as good as where we were at this time last year. However, one of the common themes that are coming through around challenges in meeting target is the impact of COVID-19. For example, access to and use of recreation and leisure services. So, libraries and pools and the impact of lockdowns, etc. There's also the odd thing that has been outside our control. For example, delays in approval of business cases by other agencies, etc. So in terms of our projects, we're doing pretty well with 80% on track at present, at the end of Q2, I should say. And in terms of the residents' opinion survey, we have improved from Q1 results, where we got 68% overall satisfaction. At the end of Q2, we had 72%. So we're on the up there, but there are some big challenges sitting in there for us, particularly around value for money. And so Josh from Research First will take us through that in a bit more detail. And so I'll now hand over to Ian, who will take us through the financials. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. Through you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. So I'll just provide a quick overview of the financial section. So that starts with the financial overview, which is page 53 of the published document. So again, I'm a bit challenged, but I think that would be around about page 84 of the agenda. Mark, you might be able to confirm whether I've got that right. But it follows through from that section, the financial overview, and then the financial statements themselves. So in terms of the highlights, the operating surplus for the 6 months was $7.7 million, and that whilst that appears to be a fairly sizable surplus, needs to be noted that within that 7.7 there were capital receipts of 7.5 million, and so capital grants and subsidies. So that's funding which comes in from the likes of Waka Kotahi or the Three Waters funding, which is a contribution towards our capital program. However, from an accounting point of view, gets recorded as revenue, doesn't affect our rated position. So if you adjust for that, the rates surplus, if you like, for the 6 months was fairly close to break even. If we have a look at revenue, 54.4 million for the 6 months and projecting to be around 105 million for the full year. Those two figures are both below budget, and if I just look at the full year outturn, it's actually 38 million below budget, which again, on the face of it, is a large figure. But again, that relates almost entirely to capital related items. And so we've got grants and subsidies where we know the timing around some of the key projects like the Link Road will be delayed and move out to next year, and therefore the capital receipts will be similarly delayed. And then there's a major item included in our budget, which was the assumption that State Highway 1 would be vested back to us this financial year. And again, from an accounting point of view, what that does when you bring the asset back onto your books creates a revenue item of 34 million, which was allowed for in our budgets. Again, we know that won't occur, so we're showing a shortfall of 34 million. But again, that's purely timing and doesn't affect the underlying rated position. If we just have a quick look at operating expenses, we were 650k under budget at the 6-month mark, and that's a variety of things, mainly maintenance. And currently, you'll see in the financials, we're forecasting an overspend of operating costs of about 2.3 million for the full year. Now, we're certainly experiencing some pressures around things like COVID expenses, PPE, etc. Some legal and professional costs around some of the initiatives that we're working on. And we're certainly seeing price pressure in some areas. Energy in particular is showing out as a pressure, so we'll certainly be over there. But nonetheless, when I look at the forecast, I think there is, as is quite common, we've got a level of conservatism, I think, in the forecasting at the same time, and particularly around the staffing profile and the recruitment intentions that we've got factored in. I think they, with the best will in the world, the managers are probably slightly over optimistic around what could be achieved there. So I think whilst we're forecasting 2.3 over, I believe we'll be closer to budget and hopefully on budget for the full year. Moving to CapEx, you'll see we've spent 17.8 million for the 6 months. So that's roughly a quarter of the annual budget. And whilst we do have a level of seasonality and typically do spend more in the second half of the year than the first, we know we won't achieve that $73 million budget. The forecast that's included in these numbers, bearing in mind this is December, was 58 million. And we've subsequently shared with you through the annual plan process an update on that, which is the most recent view is more like 51. And again, as we get closer to the end of the year, we'll have a further revision as we, with the Q3 report and with the annual plan finalisation, we'll bring the best numbers we can to you before year end. And we're certainly taking account of the impact of that, the delays through into the rating calculations through the annual plan for next year. And again, the main, there's a series of timing differences going on within that CapEx program, but the main items that are looking like they'll be delayed are the Link Road and some of the water projects. And then finally, I'll just touch on net debt was 162 million at December. So that equates to 171% of operating income. And that compares against our LTP or our limits of 280% and our preferred limit of 250. So we're well under those limits at the moment. And again, hand in hand with the CapEx, we would expect our net debt to be lower than it would otherwise have been. And that's those are really the highlights that I just wanted to note with you.
Thank you. And look, we will move on to the next one, but just before we do, I want you just to elaborate a little bit further around that surplus. I know there's been discussions around surpluses in the past, and just to really clearly clarify, and obviously for the benefit of the fact that this is live streamed and recorded, the majority, I think the point that you had made was without that external funding, there would unlikely to be a surplus and it would be break even. Do you want to just really clearly clarify that in terms of that funding that comes in again, so it's crystal clear?
So, certainly. So we receive, as you know, we receive contributions from external parties towards certain capital projects, and in particular, and it's entities like Waka Kotahi who subsidise our roading expenditure, but we've also got other capital-related initiatives around the Three Waters. We received some stimulus funding approved last year, where some of that is occurring this year, and some external funding for Te Urahi, for example. So that money is to offset the capital costs of the project. From an accounting point of view, it shows up as revenue. So it goes into the bank, debit credit, we have to record it as revenue, which is why you're seeing the 7.5 million coming through, but it doesn't affect, it effectively channels through to offset the capital cost and doesn't affect the rating position.
Thank you, Ian. So we've got a comment here from Mark as well. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I just wanted to just reflect as well that on page 39 of the agenda, or page 8 of the report, in terms of the snapshot, where it says how we manage finances, where it says the 7.7, we have actually laboured the point, the little comment below, that really just does reflect the timing of receiving grants and subsidies from third parties and does not represent a permanent cash surplus.
Thank you, Mark, and I appreciate that. I guess the point of me raising this is people often won't delve into the whole document and all the fine print, so it's good to just highlight up there verbally in the course of this meeting. I'm pretty sure that elected members are aware of that position, but I thought it was good to clarify it. Who's up next?
So at this stage, we should be handing over to Josh from Research First. Josh will take you through the just a quick overview of the resident satisfaction survey results, which is on page 95 of the council agenda. And for those actually following on the website, it's page 64 of the report. So over to you, Josh, when you're ready. Thank you.
Morena, Josh.
Thanks, Mark, and through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so g'day everyone. I'm Josh Ryan from here at Research First. So we conduct the residents' opinion survey 4 times a year for the council. The report, as Mark said, started on page 64 and page 65 of the agenda. This report only contains the results from Q2, which was conducted in December of 2021. But today I'm going to go through and make some comparisons with Q1, which was conducted of September of last year, and also discussing the results from Q2 from 2020-2021. So starting on page 64, we asked about the overall satisfaction of residents. We found that 72% of residents were satisfied with the council overall, which is found to be an increase of 4% since Q1 last year. However, when comparing with Q2 of 2020-2021, we see that overall satisfaction has actually decreased by 9%. Further on this page is value for money perceptions. So the same was identified here as in Q1 of last year, of December 2022, or 2021-2022, we found that 47% of residents were satisfied with their value for money. It was actually quite a large decrease of 13% since Q1 of last year, and a further decrease of 9% at the same time last year. The reason for this change was identified through a key driver analysis, which basically compares all residents' perceptions against overall satisfaction, basically to understand which perceptions had the largest impact on residents' overall satisfaction. So we turn to page 65 and page 96 of the agenda. We see these drivers of change in satisfaction. So the 3 drivers that were found to be negatively perceived and influenced the poor performance or a decrease in performance of satisfaction were threefold. So these were the decision-making of the council, the value for money perception, and the belief that the client is going, the council is going in the right direction. These 3 drivers were found to decrease by between 5 and 10% since Q2 or the same period of time as last year. Just a few comments that residents made for this decrease, and specifically the decrease in value for money. So one resident was stated they felt that the value for money was dropped as they believe money was being spent on high status or legacy projects, and there wasn't enough focus being placed on housing and social support. Another resident stated that, again, they just don't believe the money was being spent in the right places, and there was just money going to the wrong things. This sort of finding was also identified in Research First's quarterly report that we run on all local governments, basically to understand what are the trends happening throughout the country. So around half of the total councils throughout New Zealand noticed a decrease in their value for money perceptions. So it's very common among upper councils, but this was most likely due to environmental impacts, such as, of course, the increase of cost of living, and as well as the increase in inflation. Further on page 96 of the agenda, we look at and measured the perceptions and sentiments about intent. So when comparing to the same time last year, we found that 2 of these factors had actually decreased. This was the ease of participants in being able to make decisions and having the opportunity to make these decisions, as well as the trust in the council to do the right thing. So both of these were found to decrease by more than 9% perception rates from Q2 of last year. If we flip over the page to 97, we look at the infrastructure services. So of the 5 infrastructure services measured, we found that 2 did not meet their specified targets. So the first was that roads allow for easy movement. We found that 64% of residents perceived that the roads did allow for ease of movement, which again failed to meet this target that was placed of 80% perception. This has decreased by 9% since Q1 of 21-22, and a further decrease of 12% at the same period of time last year. Again, a comment from a resident about the issues that they were facing. So they said they just believe the council put far too many traffic lights and unnecessary traffic lights in for the amount of people of the area. The next infrastructure service that failed to meet its target was the condition of roads. So we found that 2/3 or 97% of residents believe that the condition of roads were not up to standard, which again just failed to reach its target of 70%. This perception has stayed the exact same since Q1 of last year or September of last year, with the reason being given that the condition of roads was not up to standard and there's just a general lack of maintenance. If we flip over the page to page 98 of the agenda, we then questioned about 10 service delivery factors, of which 3 of these did not meet their targets. So the first was the condition of the walkways, cycleways, and bridleways. We found that 80% of residents believed that these weren't sufficient in their upkeep, again failing to meet its target of 85%. So this perception has actually decreased by 7% since Q1 of last year, September last year, as well as decreasing by 15% at the same time as last year in Q2 last year. The next service delivery that failed to meet its target was emergency preparedness. So 66% of residents believed that they did have an emergency plan and kit that would be sufficient for a 7-day emergency. Again, just failing to reach its target of 70%. This perception has increased 4% since September last year. However, has actually dropped significantly by 17% from a year ago. The last service delivery that did not meet its target was the unique character and development of the environment, of the natural environment. So 61% of residents believe that the district was developing in a way that takes into account the unique character and environment, failing to reach the target set in place of 75%. This perception has decreased by 7% since September or Q1 of last year, and also decreased 9% since Q2 of last year. If we flip to page 99 of the agenda report, we then look at the overall outcomes that have been set in place for this year. So again, these were only measured in Q1 and Q2, so the last half year of surveys. So the first of which is communities. So communities was calculated by combining residents' perceptions of their opinion on the communities being resilient and safe, communities being healthy, thriving and connected, their opinion on the access to resources and services, and lastly, their belief of the sense of belonging within the community. We found that in Q2, 89% of residents agreed with these outcomes and perceived these outcomes, which was just a slight decrease of 1% since Q1 when these outcomes were first measured. The next one, economy. So the economy outcome was based on the perception that the local economy is prosperous and has ample opportunities to work. This was perceived by 74% of residents. And interestingly, was that there was no change identified between Q1 and Q2 when we first measured these, which suggests that the lack of work opportunities is not impacting the decrease that we saw in the value for money perception. The third outcome is the environment. So this outcome is based on the perception that the natural environment is being restored and enhanced effectively. So in Q2, we found that 77% of residents agreed with this statement, which was a decrease of 6% since we first ran this outcome in September of last year. Finally, housing. So the final outcome that was measured was the housing, and was asked about the access residents have to housing in Kapiti to ensure that they can live and thrive in general. In Q2, we found that only 30% of residents agreed with this statement, which was a slight decrease of 4% from September 2021. That is all from me about recovering the basics of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. And if I could just check with Mark so that it's really clear to elected members, Josh is hanging around for however long he needs to, and we'll be opening it up for questions to discuss the residents' opinion survey at which point?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Look, absolutely. Josh will be online to answer any questions until we have completed report 8.3. So, Mr. Chair, before I do hand over to you, I will just give a bit of a summary. We heard from Josh pretty much probably the negatives, and hopefully you will all see that actually in terms of the infrastructure and perceptions and service delivery, actually there are plenty of spaces that we've actually done quite well on. We have had an uplift in terms of resident satisfaction in Q2 from Q1. And of course, we've got many things happening out there, COVID, cost of living, etc., which is driving those results. Before I do hand over to you, Mr. Chair, just by way of a very quick summary, hopefully councillors are feeling that generally in terms of council's performance for the half year, both financial and non-financial, is generally pretty good in terms of the performance measures that we can measure for the half year. We've achieved many of those. There's a few that we haven't, and we'll work on those. And there's a lot that aren't yet due because they're only annual measures. In terms of the finances, we're managing our finances really well. That's all tracking. The resident satisfaction survey result, just a reminder to everyone, those are actually surveyed residents. So that is not the whole of the district. Those are not our all of our ratepayers. Those are the residents surveyed. So generally speaking, for the first 6 months, the council is in relatively good shape. There are always areas to focus on, and this report has highlighted those areas that we will focus on over the next 6 months. So, Mr. Chair, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Look, the question that I had for you just at the end there was at which point, because I can see a number of councillors have got questions around the residents' opinion survey. And just because we've got a new layout, at which point do you want me to open it up for that particular one? Because I don't want to get lost. Certainly want to enable discussion. Do we move through now activity by activity, or would you rather just pause here, take questions on the residents' opinion survey, and then let Josh depart?
Through you, Mr. Chair, look, I think it would be sensible to just probably there is a navigation bar, but I think because we have Josh, instead of keeping Josh on right till the end, why don't we move to the resident satisfaction survey results, take the questions with that, and when everyone's happy, then Josh can leave the meeting.
All right, thank you. So look, team, that's what I'm going to do because I can see there are a number of hands up there. Before I do that, there's a couple of comments from me, and then I'll open it up for questions. I guess, so last meeting where we had the residents' opinion survey, I had raised with the Chief Executive the need to have a discussion around the results from the residents' opinion survey. I do not think even in the course of this meeting that elected members can probably delve into the good and the bad points. I think as Mr. De Haas has mentioned, there are many good attributes that have been highlighted. We probably need a good couple of hours to delve through that with SLT, the Chief Executive, and with, in my opinion, someone from Reed Research as well, to understand a little bit more behind some of that feedback. So we'll, in a sec, just see if Wayne's available to speak to when we could potentially do that, because that obviously hasn't occurred yet. We have had Christmas and summer holidays and so forth. But the other highlight for me, I guess, to indicate how challenging these surveys can be, is the housing one. For the elected members around the table, we probably have done more in the last 12 to 18 months in the housing space than this council's ever done. And that's, a pretty average result in terms of the graph there. So it doesn't always necessarily reflect the work and effort that goes into a space. However, we can't just ignore the fact that ignore the results that are there simply for that reason as well. So Wayne, if you're there, I do want to just give you an opportunity to talk about when elected members could have a more fuller discussion around the residents' opinion survey results, and potentially either a briefing or a workshop. If we could get a date locked down, obviously not right now in this meeting, but within the next week or so, and then we'll open it up for questions for elected members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks so much for that opportunity. We haven't, as you quite rightly said, set a date. There's a heck of a lot of stuff going on that our limited resources have been briefing you on. So look, all I can undertake to is go away and find a date. I've heard what you've said, what you've requested, and we'll come back to you and see what we can put in place.
Thank you, Wayne. I guess that's the key point, that we can get a date locked in. I appreciate that there's been a lot on both internally and externally over the last few months, but I also don't want to move past this meeting today without trying to lock something in for the future. So with that, I'm opening it up for questions, and I'm just going to take them as I can see them on the screen. So Councillor Compton, you're up first. We have got a number of hands, so if I can ask all elected members just to try and be nice and succinct with your questions, and if it's relevant, point to the specific page that it's on. So you're up, Gwyn.
Thank you. Through the chair, on page 95 of council papers, we're obviously seeing some of the lowest scores we've recorded in terms of overall satisfaction and value for money. And I think we're all aware that there's been specific local issues that have been driving that. But I'm aware that Research First does a lot of work in the local government space more broadly on perceptions about the sector. So I'm curious to know what intelligence Josh has in terms of how these measures are trending for other councils, and whether Kapiti is in line with those, or if we're doing better or worse. I've got two questions, but that's the first one.
Cool, good question. I do think that Josh addressed that, but in his presentation.
Very, very quickly, it was a single sentence on it. I guess it's more that, are we
delve a little bit
are
deeper?
We in line with it, or are we doing better, or are we doing worse? I mean, I was just looking at some of the stuff they've published on their LinkedIn page, because I'm friends with one of their board members, so I keep an eye on what gets published there. But I'm just sort of curious as to to what extent, I guess, are we in line with the broader trends in the sector? Gotcha.
Over to you, Josh.
Thanks for that, and through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's a great question, and you're right. We're seeing these sort of decreases or even holds all throughout New Zealand. So an interesting thing we found between August and December last year was that discussion levels with local governments actually decreased by 21%. So we're seeing, and we're seeing this a lot of our other research, is that people aren't as willing to do surveys and aren't as willing to give their opinion, as there's bigger things going on at the moment, of course. But yeah, you're right. So I did touch on it very briefly, but so value for money perceptions across New Zealand and all local governments have decreased so the value for money has decreased by 41% in these councils. 51% of them has just stayed the same, with only 8% showing an increase. It's the exact same in overall satisfaction. So we see that 29% of councils have shown a decrease, 60% have stayed the same, while only 11% have increased. Basically, all sort of factors like this are showing a decrease, and it's trending pretty similarly to what we're finding in Kapiti.
Thank you. That was very helpful. For my second question, on page 96, there's those the 7 drivers about overall satisfaction and perceptions about sentiments and intent. And I was just wondering if it might be possible to get those 7 drivers over that sort of similar time period that you've got for the graphs on page 95, just to see how they go over that longer term period. Obviously not today, but at some point I think that would be a useful thing, just to see how they have moved over time rather than just getting those single isolated figures, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks for that. So there are actually 2 different parts. So we see at the top of the page, you look at drivers of change. So what we do is we run a key driver analysis, which basically combines all these different perceptions from all the responses and compare their effect against overall satisfaction to basically understand what is it that if a resident is very positive in one aspect, is that affecting overall section better or worse? Or if they're overly negative, is that affecting better or worse? So you'll see I run this analysis every single quarter, and we see that these three aspects actually change quite frequently. So one time, yes, it could be value for money, and the belief the council is going in the right direction, and the perception that the council is making good decisions. Whereas we're actually running Q3 currently, and we could see that there's other aspects that is actually impacting residents' overall satisfaction with the council. So, but yeah, that's a great point, is that if we could compare them overall over the entire 3 or 4 years that we've been running the survey, I'm sure it would be quite interesting data to see.
So can I leave that one with you, Josh, and Mark de Haas to see whether that information is readily available and can be pulled out, or whether it's a bigger piece of work? I don't imagine it to be. Take Councillor Compton's point. I think that's all from you, Gwen.
Yep, that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Councillor Randall.
Yeah, thank you. My questions are addressed to Josh. Josh, are the questions that you ask the residents, like last year, or every time you do these resident surveys, are they the same questions? That's the first point. And are you asked by council staff or other people to modify those questions in subsequent surveys?
Yes, thanks. Great question. So as Joe and Mark touched on, we changed the survey quite a lot in September of last year. So originally, 6 months ago, it was quite a long survey. Took a very long time. And as Mr. Chair stated on, it was quite a long report and a lot of data to go through to understand what was occurring within cavity. So after that, we went through, identified the questions that were most important to understand to really create these 4 outcomes that we are now mainly reporting on. So to answer your question, that is the only changes that we make. And now that we have these questions set in stone, there is no adjusting them without a good amount of discussion, as we really want to see how things trended over the 4 surveys each year, of course, as well as over multiple years.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Can I make a comment, Mr. Chair? I just want to comment that the long-term plan, when we did consultation on long-term plan, we had similar results. So that's from my personal opinion.
Thank you, Councillor Randall. Josh, the question there from Councillor Randall was around, obviously the questions that are asked. Can I just dovetail off that while we're on that same question? In your opinion, given the surveys that you do right across New Zealand, have the changes diluted the quality of the reporting back to council, or actually kept it the same or increased it? I guess the point there is the changes made, we're looking at outcomes. Have they given more richer outcomes or feedback as a result of that?
Great, thanks, Mr. Chair. And it's a good point. I believe that they definitely haven't decreased the quality of the data that we receive. I would even go towards saying that it has improved it. As when a respondent is sitting there doing a 25, 30-minute survey, they get lost. They don't give their true beliefs about what they believe is happening in their district. Shortening this and allowing them to truly say what they believe and what are the biggest positive and negatives that are affecting them is a great way to really improve the quality and get the actual responses that we're trying to look for.
Thanks, Josh. And I guess that's the important part, hence why I asked the question. Yeah. Appreciate the response. Councillor Elliott, you're up next.
Thank you, Josh. I've just got 2 questions. One's for yourself and the other was staff might like to jump in and help. So I'm talking about the cycleways and pathways question. Was that posed in the actual wording to include shared pathways?
Thank you for that. I am not entirely sure, but so for this question here, we asked, so obviously we've grouped everything together, walkways, cycleways, right-of-ways. But what we actually do is ask that separately and then combine the results together to create a overall perception. But I can check that and understand how we've worded that to see if it includes shared pathways as well as normal walkways. I can get back to you on that.
Thank you. And my second question generally to staff is, I'm more interested in the rich information behind this. For instance, what was the actual nature of the complaints? Was it about pathway surfaces or the weeds, which would be wakakotahi? And number of complaints and whether or not they were from individuals or user groups. So where was the opportunity to delve in? Will that be the workshop that follows this?
Yes, we do have that data. It's just not presented here. We asked them to, we actually combined all aspects and asked them to say, okay, of these ones that you've rated negatively, which ones do you have any further comments about them? So we can then pull out that sort of data to understand, yes, so is it the weeds growing over the paths? Is it the maintenance of them? I don't know the exact percentages off the top of my head, but it's something that definitely we've got there and we can understand. And
thanks, Josh. I'm going to hand it over to Mark just to get him to respond to the second part of that question from Councillor Elliott.
Thanks.
So through you, Mr. Chair, yes, Councillor, in terms of the workshop, we'll have the opportunity to go through some of the rationale behind the scores, and we'll take that as feedback as we look to, improve this report. We have that information. So just as Councillor Compton has suggested a potential improvement to the report, we'll take your comment on board as well.
Thank you very much. Lovely.
Councillor McCann.
Kia ora. Obviously, my question will be around housing and that 30%, which I think is probably an indication of what the dire situation we're in. My question is, were there similar questions put to other councils, and how was the feeling around housing and access to housing around the rest of New Zealand?
Thanks, Rob. I don't have that information right in front of me, but again, I can find that out and include that in the annual report that we write up. So basically compare local governments all over the country comparing to this housing result.
And if I can just flag that, Mr. Chair, that might be something that we want to discuss at that workshop.
Thank you, Councillor Kane. I think the point around how we fare nationally on some of these topics is equally important on housing and on all the other matters, but obviously some of that will come down to the nature of the questions other councils ask in their surveys and whether we have that data. But again, I'm sure staff will pick up on some of this feedback and we can discuss that in a future workshop. I've got up next, I think I had actually Councillor Pravanov, although Councillor Hanford is next on my screen. So I'm going to go to Jocelyn and then move on from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just picking up on a little point that Mr. De Haast made, but my question is actually for Josh. So there's been lots of questions around the survey questions and the survey types, but obviously a survey is a representation of our whole district. And I suppose my question is, how do you go about doing the survey to ensure that the results are a good representation of our whole district?
So I think that's for
Josh?
For Josh, all right.
Yeah, thanks, Jocelyn. So what we do is to ensure that we are representative with our data. We look at the 2018 census and we then see how the breakup of ethnicities, genders, ages, and their locations within Kapiti are. We then make sure that we follow that same percentages to ensure that we are fully representative of the Kapiti residents. Within 800, so we conduct 200 responses each quarter, so 800 in general. This sort of database would usually lead us towards a margin of error of around 4%. So what margin of error is to ensure that we're representative of the entire population within Kapiti, so we can say that we are 95% sure that this response, so the response of overall satisfaction of 72%, is 4% higher or lower than the entire population of Kapiti.
Thank you for that. So,
Jocelyn, sorry, if I could just hold you there for a sec, because I can see Joe's got her hand up as well, and I'm not too sure if it's in response to your same question. So I just want to check with Joe.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to let people know that when the questions were reviewed, it was against the new long-term plan. So we went through that and made sure that things were aligned. That's why for the first time we can now see satisfaction against our outcomes. They weren't in the survey previously. So it was lining it up with the LTP. Yeah.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. So in relation to the census and the profile of our district, are there any particular age groups that you find difficulty or you aren't quite able to meet those surveys results?
Yes, thanks, Jocelyn. So we have this exact issue throughout the entire nation, and in every survey we do, is that younger generation of 18 to 29 is always incredibly difficult to obtain, whereas the inverse is said for 60 plus, who are very easily to get. So what we do is we have 200, we sit this out into the different age groups. Once one is full, so 60 plus, always first full, we completely close that and we do not accept any more surveys from this age group. We then we always focus directly on the younger ages. We always know the difficulty it is in obtaining them. But so far for quarters 1 and quarters 2 of this survey of 2021, 2022, we've actually had quite good responses from this age group, and we hope to continue with this trend.
Thank you very much.
Jocelyn, did you have any further questions? Because I was going to go to Councillor Hanford before we move off that topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I do not. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jocelyn. Sophie, I was going to sort of segue straight into you and go back to Jocelyn, but she's finished. I was assuming you might have a question around youth. So if we want to just follow on over to you and we'll see how Josh can help.
Yeah, I just had pretty much exactly the same question as Jocelyn around, kind of what age group or what kind of demographic in the community was kind of harder to reach through the survey. And I'm also quite kind of interested to hear about whether the responses that you had from young people were kind of a lesser contribution, or whether they still really took the time to feedback quite fully. And that's my first question, and I've got another one after that.
All right, thanks, Sophie. So we use phone interviews for the entire 800 responses each year. The reason we do this instead of only using online or using a different method is that you get much richer data through phone surveys. You get a one-to-one time with the respondent, and you can really delve into the issues and the comments that they have to make. So the quality of the data is very strong with these phone interviews. However, as you know, we use both landline and mobile phone numbers to track respondents. But of course, with landline numbers, it's very easy to direct towards the Kapiti region, whereas mobile phone users, it's quite difficult. So of course, a lot of youth nowadays just don't have these landlines, and a lot of people are moving away from it. So that's why we are continually looking and actively looking for new methods of getting as rich a data quality. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I see we've got Joe's got her hand up as well. So we'll just let Joe have a comment.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Just to let people know that we do have an online tool that allows us to drill down behind a lot of the answers to get a lot more data and richer information. That tool actually, you can filter by age, location, year, etc. So, we can actually break down the information a bit further if you need it going forward.
Thanks, Joe. And I think I've said this before in a meeting. I've received a phone call when I've been at my mum's and found that I didn't fit the profile that had already closed out. And so certainly they're very thorough in terms of making sure they get those different segments and so forth. So I think you said you had one further question, Sophie?
Yeah, I did. And Joe, I think that would be extremely helpful if there was the opportunity to, as the chair mentioned, in some kind of workshop where we could drill into some of this stuff a bit further, kind of having that information available there would be really great. But thanks for your response too, Josh. That's really good to hear that, that youth engagement is really strong, and we'll just keep that up across all processes, fingers crossed. And thanks for putting in the effort and making sure that voices are prioritised and not just we're not just hearing from one kind of demographic within our community. My second question is kind of along the lines of something that Councillor McCann mentioned in the housing space, but also with our target for restoration and enhancement of environment, moving towards a low carbon future and the outcome of environment, or our environment outcome. So yeah, keen to kind of hear or be sent through following this a perception of how other councils are doing too across New Zealand. So just the same question, but in the environment and climate action space. I'm keen to hear about communities' perceptions across New Zealand, and I think that'll enable us to figure out how we address that through communications and through doing more. And so would appreciate that too.
Great, thanks for that. I'm making notes as I'm going about ensuring that we be able to pull through that sort of data for the annual report that we here at Research First put together. As you're right, it would be very interesting to understand how things are tracking in Kapiti compared to other local governments.
Thanks, Josh. I think I've got Councillor Halliday up next.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. It's actually just an opinion from Josh, I suppose. Just looking at page 100 or 69 on the report. Maybe I missed that, but I don't think we really touched on those. And those percentages there are quite high. So they're sort of in contrast to the drilling down aspect. So we'd assume from those statistics, and that's around communities are self-reliant, access to resources. Generally, everyone likes being on the Kapiti Coast. Generally, people like being here. So we just draw down the specifics. Some people might have issues in certain areas that need to be addressed. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yes, very so much so. So yes, I didn't touch on this too much in the quick recap I did. So these 4 aspects are what make up the community's outcome. So that is why the community's outcome, which sits at 89% currently for Q2, is basically the merging of these 4 data points. But yeah, you're right. A lot of percent, sorry, during my thing, as Mark said, I focus on the negatives because that's where we can really understand how we can improve. But overall, Kapiti's residents are very happy. And these responses, as you said, are showing it with things like 98% feel that they really do have a sense of belonging. And there's other aspects such as belief that Kapiti is the right place for them. Very high responses and very high perceptions.
Thanks, Martin. Great question, Martin. Councillor Pravanov, I think you're the last, and then we'll go back to the body of the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a supplementary question, and a very quick question for Josh. So I assume that with the data that you've collected, you can break it down by age group.
Yes, thanks, Jocelyn. So as Joe was talking about, we have an online dashboard where we place all the data from all the surveys we've conducted for the council. From here, you're able to filter against all of these different questions and all of the outcomes by age, location, gender, and a few other demographic types to allow you to really understand what it is that is affecting different aspects and how different residents are perceiving different factors.
Thank you for that. So I suppose knowing that information, it would be, if I could ask that when we do have a separate briefing on this, that we, we have a good idea about, how, particularly young people may differ from older people, and, whether there's a trend or whether it goes up and down. Thank you.
All right, I think that's it. A final comment from me, Mark, certainly what we've heard from some of the elected members is the advantage or the insights into looking what's happening nationally. So if you could have that as a bit of a takeaway, there's obviously been some comments about that information that sits in the background and the ability to be able to break that down to, whether it's age group or area. And I think the other thing from my perspective is often when you see the information and you see the results, reading those verbatim comments helps you understand sometimes the why. And a point that Councillor Elliott raised was around, say, for example, of people's satisfaction with our walkways, bridleways and so forth. If the verbatim comments, reference our shared pathways and the overgrown weeds and so forth, although that's disappointing, that's waka kotahi. So, not to try and always try and smudge over the figures and point the finger elsewhere. It's also it is good to understand where those scores are coming from and the thoughts and feedback behind that. So, Mark, do you have anything further to add before we start to move on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, Josh, thank you, and thanks, councillors, for all your questions. It's been a really good test run. That section of the report. We certainly will, as we've heard from the Chief Executive, we will have a separate briefing at which we will show you the online tool, and we'll work with Josh and the team to get national data. I won't promise that we'll get national data on everything. It'll be what Research First has. The main point is that the survey questions have been overhauled. They've been freshened up. They are aligned with our long-term plan, with the outcomes that you've set, with the service levels and performance measures that you've set. So we haven't designed those survey questions based on what all the other councils are doing. It's largely what we've committed to do with our long-term plan. But I have heard very loudly that you would like to know how other councils across the country are performing. So when we have that information, we'll bring that, we will do that workshop, and we will look to strengthen that part of the report. So I've taken that all on board, Mr. Chair, and we will come back.
Thank you, Mark. So now, Josh, thank you very much for joining us. You feel free to get on with your other business. Mark, could you maybe give me a page number that we want to start from? Sorry. Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Chair. Look, I'm assuming that we will probably get into the navigation bar of what we delivered. That goes into the detail of the activities. I am assuming that no one wants to ask a question on the kōrero. So in terms of page number, as a suggestion, I'm trying to find it myself.
41, page 41.
I think that's about right, Mr. Chair. I'm just scrolling myself.
Which is 10 of the document, Ange.
Yes, section 1, what we delivered. So page 41 is really just an overview of all the activities and the groupings. So probably if we get into, we'll start infrastructure on page 44 of the council agenda and page 13 of the report.
Thank you, Mark. And look, for elected members, I am considering when we take a break, my desire would be to get through this report and then take a break at the end. That will be obviously dependent on how many, or we'll still have a break, but when that happens, will be dependent on how many questions we ask through these reports. So if we can move to, was it 48 you said, Mark?
3, Mr. Chair, page 44 of the council agenda, page 13 of the actual report.
All right, and have we got Sean to walk us through infrastructure?
I believe we have Sean on standby. I'll just have a check.
Yes, Sean is available, Mr. Chair.
Morning, Sean. So look, over to you if you want to just talk us through infrastructure, and then we'll obviously move on category by category from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't going to sort of dive into the detail, more to really take questions, take the section as read. I think Joe mentioned there's a couple of areas in terms of KPIs that we were not meeting those targets. The one around ease of condition of roads, and I think the other one was ease of movement around the district. And we talked a little about those, but one of the issues there is also potentially the amount of work that's going on at the moment across the district. So both the Peka Peka to Otaki works, I guess, and also maybe a little bit of overlap from TG not being completed, but we are also doing a lot of other work, which is a function, I guess, of increased expenditure in that space, but also with any of that work on the roading network, there's always an element of disruption associated with it. So, but yeah, happy to take questions if anyone has questions that relate to the infrastructure section.
Thank you. And I guess for the other staff or group managers, as we move through the categories, just touching on the key highlights. Obviously don't need to talk to the whole report there, but if there's any key highlights you want to raise, and obviously anything out of the residents' opinion survey, as Sean has just mentioned, for infrastructure. So Councillor Holborough, first up, then Councillor Randall.
Yeah, thanks for this. Certainly, most of the targets have been achieved. I just wanted to pick up one, and I hope I'm asking this question at the right time. Page 26 of the report, like Councillor Buswell, I don't have access to the page numbers on the agenda, and it's around the compliance with council's resource consents for discharge. And I'm just not quite understanding the comment, Otaki abatement notice did not consult with residents. Was consultation a part of this, or? And I just a little bit more information about that compliance target, which wasn't achieved.
Mark, can I just clarify? Sorry, Sean, can I just clarify that we are, because like normally we would talk from page number to page number. I don't want elected members to be nervous about whether they're asking questions in the right place. It is infrastructure, so we're not getting out of step here. Excellent. Over to you, Sean.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's a couple of issues there. Paraparaumu and the one in Otaki both relate to the significant wet weather events we've had recently. So Paraparaumu, we had a discharge from our wastewater storm retention basin. If you know the plant, there's a large retention pond at the rear of the plant, and we're able to use that and have a consent for that, but the volume of rain that we had meant that we weren't able to retain all of that within the tank. The Otaki issue there is, I believe there's a condition that requires notification of a community liaison group, and I understand that that didn't occur, but we've put a process in place to make sure that does occur if we have a similar issue in Otaki again in the future.
Thanks. Maybe that could be a little bit, because some of the other comments have how we're going to address it, or that kind of thing. So maybe that could be added in future. Thanks a lot. That clarifies that.
Thank you, Councillor Hanford. Oh, sorry, Sean.
I was just going to acknowledge we can look to modify the next report that comes back and make sure that that's retained in terms of more detail on that one.
Thank you, Sean. Councillor Hanford.
Oh, yeah, kia ora. I just have a question. Page 47 of the council agenda, so not of the report. Oh, wait, did I get that right? Yes. The Paikakiriki seawall says it's kind of on track, likely to be completed within timeframes set. I just wanted to make sure that this was still the case. And Sean, if there's any really brief update you could provide on that, recognising that this isn't, an update on that as specifics, but yeah, would be keen to just kind of make sure that that was still on track.
Sure. So this report is obviously up till December. So as you mentioned, Councillor Hanford, yeah, we are aware that it is, from a resourcing and contractors point of view, it's going to be, I think, unlikely that we'll be able to deliver as much as we'd hope this financial year. So I expect it's not potentially going to deliver that Campbell Park access as completed by the end of June. And as we get more issues with COVID coming through, I expect, yeah, that's going to be a real issue there.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that, Sean. I just have one more question, if that's okay, Mr. Chair. Cool, thank you. On page 59 of the council agenda, the waste minimisation education programme being cancelled this year due to the traffic light settings, and obviously that's had a big impact on the way we have to live and the way we work. But I'm just wondering whether it was investigated as to kind of an option of an online delivery of such a programme, and if not, and if that kind of resource wasn't being used over the time that this performance report covers, then where was that resource being repurposed to?
So the first question there, I'm not aware that we have, I guess, the facilities to run remote training like that through the schools. So I can follow up with Ninka, but I don't believe it was practical to actually try and run that. And I think a function of everything that's been going on with COVID, it's probably not as much a spare resource as opposed to less pressure on existing resources struggling to deliver the current work program. So yeah, that would be the response to that one.
Thanks, Sean. I thought that might be the case too, but good questions. Good question, Sophie.
I think that's all my questions, but I'll come back if I've got any more. Thanks.
Thanks, Sophie. Councillor Randall.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are more directed for the public's benefit, and that is, can you explain briefly why we installed traffic lights for pedestrian crossing in Rimi Road and a traffic lights in the Haka Street rather than a roundabout? Thank you.
So Haka Street traffic lights, there is not enough space to install a roundabout at that site. If you look at you're referencing, sorry, the revocation work, Councillor Randall, on the Old State Highway?
Correct.
Yeah, so there just isn't enough space to safely accommodate the size of a roundabout that you would you'd need at Haka Street. The other issue there is, as you move more into, I guess, the Paraparaumu town centre, making those intersections more pedestrian, cycle friendly is certainly something that was one of the key objectives for the revocation. And roundabouts obviously are not as user friendly as traffic lights when you look at pedestrian access and cycle access through those areas. So the shared path that extends to the north through Paraparaumu town centre actually links up at Haka Street if you have a look at the new footpath through there. So that's a key element to that intersection as well. And also the future connection through to the link road will run down through Haka Street as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bernie. Councillor Pravanov. Team, I'm trying to keep up with who's who in line, but some of the screens are jumping around a little bit. So next to you, Councillor Elliott, and then Councillor Halliday.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think possibly I may not have lowered my hand when I needed to. I've got some financial questions and I'll wait till then if I may.
Oh, thanks, Jocelyn. That'll be great. Councillor Elliott.
Look, thanks, Sean. Just a few questions. Because it was brought up in the customer satisfaction survey, are all the proposed new traffic lights in the district now installed?
As far as I'm aware, there are actually, so the revocation project, as you go through, as they're working through Waikanai, there is a new set of lights proposed at that Ngaio intersection with the Old State Highway. And from memory, I'm not aware of any other plans currently to look to install traffic lights.
Okay, thank you. That's really good. Look, I'm wondering if there could be an extra sign put at that site for the public, a hugest sign that says this is a Waka-Kotahi project, not KCDC. When those lights are being installed, let's just see how the satisfaction survey looks after that. Secondly, Councillor Holbrook mentioned consents for discharge as covered off in the annual reporting. Is there also reporting on compliance with other consents?
Well, I'm not. Sorry, Councillor. Yes, so I think there's a general measure that actually reflects regulatory compliance across the whole organisation.
Okay.
So when we report back on that, I certainly sign a declaration every month, I think it is, or every quarter, to confirm the extent of any non-compliance. So what you're seeing there is really the sum of that across the organisation.
Lovely, thank you. And one more question, then a comment. Can we have an update sometime, Sean, please, on the Blue Bluff slips remediation?
Sure, absolutely. Happy to bring. We are looking at bringing something back. We're just reviewing some additional pricing information. So certainly Councillor Coots and his role has been sort of informed, but yeah, we're conscious that we haven't been back since we had that additional slip just before Christmas.
Councillor Elliott, feel free to give me a call anytime just to discuss what I do know up to this date. There will be a briefing to councillors, but that will be when they have enough information to fully brief you. So, but feel free to give me a call.
Yeah, thanks, James. I do update Facebook pages for a couple of champion groups, so that would be great. Just lastly, if I may respond to Sophie's question, Our waste minimisation staff have just, so far I know, run the first online waste minimisation Zoom hui to a group, to a community group. So, yep, they are definitely looking at working in that space, and they're working beautifully and making videos. They're all making videos. So there we are.
Oh, thanks, Jackie. Councillor Halliday.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. A question to Sean on page 45. Residents who were satisfied with the conditions of the road was down. I'm aware pre-Christmas, Ratanui Road had some issues with the resealing and stuff, and I know a few people weren't happy around there, and this isn't the first time that's happened. Is there an issue here, or what was the story around all that?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so I expect that is all. Yeah, that's being picked up in terms of the survey results. Yeah, so Ratanui had some issues earlier in the year. Those issues, I guess, there was some remediation put through by our maintenance contractor Higgins, and but as we got into the hotter weather in early December, we had to undertake further remedial work up there. So yes, it was an issue. We've done some repair work. We will need to go back and do some further work there. And there was an update I think I provided through to elected members earlier in the year, but I'm happy to give you another an update, because we were looking at remedial work towards the end of March, but I'm not sure whether now that's going to be possible with the pressure that Higgins are under in terms of staffing. So we're okay. The pavement surface at the moment may not look that great, but we believe we've got on top of the bleeding, which is the bitumen basically being pumped up to the surface and causing problems on the road surface itself.
And look, thank you for that, Sean. But just checking, is this a contracted error as such? Are they held accountable if it is as such, or is this just a supply problem?
No, it's a contract we have as a performance-based contract for the reseal work. So basically, the contractor has to meet a minimum standard, and they will be required to keep going back to undertake remedial work until they meet that standard. So it is an issue that we're seeing across the country, really. Chip sealing works, and I'm not sure whether it's just a factor of pressure on the resources across the country and some of the competency that used to be around to deliver that work. It does seem to be getting harder and harder to get chip sealing work done to a significant quality standard. So it's something that's been talked about a lot in the industry in terms of maybe there's a need to do more training and development, and why are we having so many issues with chip seal? You'll be aware, I think there's some issues on TG. There's also been some other issues regionally in terms of chip seal failure into the north. So yeah, it's not one single thing. I think it's a number of factors that are affecting it.
Okay, well, it's good to know it's being dealt with. I just want to follow up on a question that Councillor Hanford had around the Paikokiri seawall. I note that you're saying that we've been blown out a little bit on time, but I'm just a little bit concerned about the cost aspect as well. Just thinking back to the Tuku stream and the problems they've had there with product. Are we on track cost-wise with regards to this still, or are we potentially looking at potential cost or even significant cost increases in that area in relation to that project?
Yeah, so the way we're staging the project at the moment, if you recall, the first stage is to look at the Campbell Park, the main access way there. So we have a detailed design for that, and that detailed design, we've had a quantity surveyor come back and update the pricing for it. And that estimate is still within what we'd allowed for in terms of the budget. But I do think that we will see more pressure applied in terms of that pricing once we go to the market for tender. Just some of the recent pricing we're seeing come through, contractors are certainly allowing for a lot of, I think, COVID-related risk in their overhead allocation to those contracts. And that's not something you can easily quantify when you're looking at it from an engineering delivery type QS process, because I mean, it's relatively easy to look to price materials and time associated with delivery, but lots of contractors' margins, you're really only taking an estimate there. In the current climate, a lot of them are because they're short-staffed, they're allowing for a lot more risk, and they're putting a lot more, and there's a lot of work around. Those margins are a lot higher than they've been historically.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you for that, Sean. And just one other question. Page 47 or 16 on the report. I just note there was reference here to the Ramati seawall. I just wanted to know, is there a plan for that or any online information around this? I did a quick search and couldn't find anything. Just as War Council down, well, sort of around that way, I guess that's me and Sophie linked, but there's obviously work going on down there. Just wondering if there's a plan around it.
Yes, certainly, Councillor. So there's a reference to it, I think, in the long-term plan. Maybe the infrastructure strategy talks about coastal, and the budget or the focus on looking at a replacement. So at the moment, the work is actually the design work to look at replacing that structure. So that work has started. Becca's the consultant that have picked that up. So there's a fair bit of work to be done before we come back and look at the detail of what might be involved in replacing it, but we've got a consultant on board to assist with that work, basically.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean and Martin. Look, just a comment from me, holding that portfolio in relation to the question that you raised there, Martin, Ratanui Road. Look, Sean's team have just been fantastic in terms of keeping me updated. When it was apparent there was some bitumen issues there, with the tar seal, the team had contacted me, gave me a heads up. What I had seen, so I guess I followed this stuff being my portfolio nationally, was that there are a number of issues nationally. I think Hamilton was another area that hit the headlines around some tar sealing issues. And it goes back to the point that Sean has raised around a real shortfall within the industry around the quality of resealing. The other challenge to that, and again, if you do a quick Google, you can see it, is a number of councils moving to tar sealing to reduce their costs and away from asphalting. So there's a number of topical discussions around the country, councils trying to cut costs and looking to use chip seal, and obviously the issues that come with that, given the comments that Sean has made around the challenges within the sector around resealing. So just to provide a little bit further context there, and happy again for you to chat with me offline if you want there, Councillor Halliday. Next up is Councillor McCann, and I think that's the last, and we'll move on to the next activity.
Kia ora through you, Mr. Chair. Just because you've opened up that discussion, is there going to be an opportunity for council to discuss the issues with chip seal versus asphalt? And obviously, for the benefit of councillors, I do spend a lot of time on Ratanui Road. I'm just wondering what our community thinks about the roads constantly going down to 30 k's, or the damage being done to vehicles versus the extra cost of asphalt. Is there an opportunity for us to actually have this discussion? Because my experience is it's not just an inconvenience anymore, it's happening very regularly.
I'm going to move to Sean, but Sean, if I could just make a couple of comments first as the portfolio holder. So one aspect of that will be the risk of not getting subsidy from Waka Kotahi, which I'm sure Sean will speak to. The other matter is in terms of Ratanui Road. Sean, I will get you to speak to that, because my understanding is there will be staff looking to more of a permanent solution there. That, from what I can recall, the team were just sort of getting it resolved through the summer. However, what I have raised with Sean and the team is often at some of these small niggly problems. So, for example, in my area around Te Horo Beach Road, up through Waituhu Valley Road, School Road, there are a number of potholes and repairs, and under the existing program, they get flagged, but the contractor gets to them within a schedule, and sometimes that means that those repairs are not attended to as quick as residents potentially want them to, or they get patched, and then from a community perspective, they see a patch job and then a patch job again over the patch job until the crew finally come through, and it could be 6 to 12 months later and actually do the job proper. And that potentially is the practice, but not the seen as good practice by the community. So Sean, I don't know if you want to add to that and just respond to Councillor McCann's question around that chip seal versus asphalting.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. It may be useful to have a further briefing, or I can certainly give you a bit more detail around those issues. But for today, I guess we would normally chip seal about 20 kilometres of our local roads a year. And Ratanui Road, you know, one of the issues is when that doesn't go well, it's very visible, but you don't see obviously the streets that we do that go well. Don't mention an issue. So we do a lot of it. It is a problem when it fails because it's very difficult to get on top of once you have a failure. It is about 4 times dearer to put asphalt down, and it's not always practical. Ratanui Road, asphalt is more of a rigid pavement. Chip seal is more of a flexible pavement. So basically, Kapiti's roads, a lot of them are, you've got sand or peat issues. They need to be flexible, otherwise you get lots of cracks. If you have a look at Kapiti Road, you'll see the treatment in Timaira Road. Actually, we did some treatments there last year. We crack sealed both those roads with the areas where they have asphalt, which is where you'll see lots of ribbons of bitumen painted over those cracks. So it's not always practical to come in and put asphalt over the top of chip seal, which is the problem with Ratanui Road. So if you know Ratanui Road, the number of years ago, the footpath that runs through there, we've had lots of issues with peat and settlement on that, and the road itself really needs to be flexible, not rigid. So that's why it's chip seal. And as Councillor Cootes, the chair, has mentioned, Waka Kotahi actually are looking at pushing more for chip seal as being their preferred treatment on the network across the country because of the cost issues, obviously, but also because of that flexibility. And but it is creating a problem because when they fail, that becomes very public. So I'm happy to have a further conversation if you'd like it at some point in the future about the complexities of chip seal and asphalt. But yeah, it is an issue, but it isn't as much of an issue because of the extent of the work we do. It's just more visible when it fails, basically.
Thanks, Sean. Look, Rob, if you can leave it with me to have a chat with Sean and the team about the merits of a briefing to elected members in the roading space. I say merits because obviously we've just got to weigh up in terms of what other pressures are on them and the organisation. So if we can see there's the time and resources available and value in it, then we'll look to maybe have a briefing just around that particular topic. Councillor Compton, I'm going to move to you and then I am going to stop for a break. We've been going for a couple of hours. I was hoping to get through this agenda item, but I think we probably need to stop for a short break. So over to you, Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the chair, Sean brought up quite a timely comment there about it being better to get on top of any failures in chip seal early in the piece. So this morning I noticed when I was out for my run that there's new chip seal that's gone down on Matatua Road from where it starts from Wharemaku Road and running down to Tainui Street. And I'd already noticed that the seal's obviously only gone in yesterday, I think it was, and there's already wheel marks appearing in it, and you can see it's starting to look a bit patchy already. So I guess, are we actively monitoring that? So given the issues that we have had with chip seal being applied elsewhere in the district recently, so that we can get on top of it as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not aware of those issues on that site, but yeah, absolutely we do. Yeah, one of the issues with chip sealing that often is an issue is the sweeping of loose chip. Also, it does take several days of trafficking to roll the chips into the bitumen to get them to sort of set. So, but we do have a comprehensive QA program. There's a number of staff within the roading team that go out on site and inspect those sites. But it does also come back to the contractor in terms of their quality control as well. So we put measures in place to check that. And if they don't meet them, then they are obliged, obviously, to come back and to redo the work, which is not great because nobody likes to come back and redo that work. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't think there's a lack of quality assurance, and I can certainly check on that site to see what's happening there.
Cool, perfect, thank you.
Yeah, Gwen, and look, if I could just give credit to what Sean has said around the quality assurance, one thing that I have been impressed, and I've certainly had some grizzles from some of the contractors, is Sean's team in terms of not letting a project be closed out if they're not happy with the quality of the work. So I can think of one area in particular where they had to go back and completely redo it because of one of Sean's team saying that's not acceptable and we're not going to sign that off. obviously Sean will look into that particular road there. I'm not aware of anything. So thanks for that feedback, Gwen. Team, I didn't see any further hands up. Mark, have you got anything you want to add before we just stop for a short 10-minute break?
Nothing from me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Look, I think we've been going for a couple of hours, and although I wanted to get through, we've got a number of other activities to get through. So we'll stop for 10 minutes and be back online at 11:40 if everyone's okay with